right now I'm planing this so it looks round, and you can't plane on this because you just come in. So
Hey, what are you guys doing here?
Oh, hey, Dad.
Yeah, I thought I was going to do this.
No, we are, Dad.
You guys are doing this instead?
Yeah. We're definitely way smarter than you.
All right, guys. So we're here to talk about the new hand plane or the block plane that you got. And what we're going to do today is help you set it up. Right now it comes in this package, so let's take it out of the package. Yeah, why don't you take that out of the package. This is a pretty inexpensive block plane. There's nothing really all that fancy about it. It's a Stanley 12220. It's going to come with some instructions. Looks like this.
They're probably useless.
I don't think those are going to help us out very much. And then you're going to have a brand spanking new shiny plane. The thing about a plane, when you get a plane, it's not like a hammer. You can't take it out of the package and just start using it right away. Instead, you have to actually set it up. The saw that you're going to get, you're going to be able to cut with right away. The plane, you can't do that with. So the first thing you're going to need to do is take your plane apart and get it set up. So what we're going to do now is show you how to set it up. The plane that you guys got, when it came to your house, it came in this package, like we just showed you. What I want you to do first is I want you to take it apart and just get familiar with the parts. So here we have
the blade.
The blade. It's often called an iron. You've got the blade here. You got the lever cap right here. And then you've got the body of the plane right here. That's all you really need to know. Before you can use your plane, you need to do two things. You need to make the bottom of your plane totally flat, which is the first thing that we're going to do, because the bottom of this plane probably isn't flat. And then after we make the bottom flat, we're going to take our blade and we're going to sharpen it. Now when you take this out of the package and look at it, it may look like it's sharp and it may actually feel sharp to you, but it can be a lot sharper. So I'm going to teach you guys how to sharpen the blade. So those are the two things I learned. So along with the plane, one of the things that you got was a package of wet dry sandpaper. So what I want you guys to do is take your package of wet dry sandpaper and I want you to look at it and I want you to notice there's a bunch of different grits in here. It starts with 120 grit sandpaper, and if you look on the back of the sandpaper, you'll see it says CW 120. And then it gets increasingly more fine, and it goes all the way to, what does this say? All the way to
300. Oh, that's what it is.
It goes all the way to 3,000 actually. So the 3,000 sandpaper is really, really fine stuff, and the 120 is really, really rough. The bigger the number, the finer it is, the more particles of grit there are on the sandpaper. So what I want you to do is I want you to go through and you're going to find the 220 grit sandpaper. So I have the 220 grit piece of sandpaper right here. I've taken it out of the box. We're going to use this to flatten the bottom of our plane. So I got the 220. Okay, now what you need to do is find a totally flat surface that you can work on. And by flat, I mean flat. The top of this table is not flat enough. You need something super flat. And for most of you, you know what the flattest place in your house is going to be? The flattest place is probably going to be on your kitchen countertops. Now, you may or may not want to do what I'm about to show you on your kitchen countertops. You definitely want to run this by mom or dad before you do it. If you have granite countertops, you're probably going to be fine doing this. But if you have marble countertops, you don't want to do what I'm about to show you. If you can't find a countertop, what you can do is actually use another surface that's super flat. So find the flattest surface that you can. What I do...
A table in your room?
The table in your room is not going to be flat enough. What we do in the wood shop, we actually use... We use this wood. This is called melamine. It's a really, really flat type of wood. Most tables aren't going to be made out of this, but we take our wet dry sandpaper and we glue it down onto our melamine, and this is how we do all of our sharpening in the shop. It's also how we flatten the bottoms of our planes. So this is a piece of 600 grit sandpaper on a piece of melamine. But you guys, what I want you to do is find a totally flat surface. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to go inside our house and we're gonna go into the kitchen and see if we can make this work in the kitchen. So we've got the sandpaper now taped down to our countertop. We're gonna take our plane and we're gonna put our plane actually back together. We're gonna put the lever cap back on. You guys are gonna need to play with these for a little bit just to kind of figure out how they go together and come apart. You're gonna have to spend a little bit of time with it. See how, whoa, I did that totally wrong. See how far out the blade is sticking? That's not good at all. So I'm gonna bring this back and I'm gonna set it up so the blade isn't sticking out nearly as far. In fact, I don't want the blade sticking out at all to begin with. So I'm gonna make sure the blade doesn't come out of the bottom of the plane at all. It's stuck in there. I'm gonna take the lever cap, I'm gonna put the lever cap back on. It's nice to have a slotted screwdriver. You can also kind of use your fingers for this too. Another trick is to take the lever cap right here and you can adjust the screw with this if you want to. But I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna put it back in, I'm gonna lock it in, and I want it to be fairly tight in there. I'm going to adjust things until it's tight. So I've got the lever cap tightened up. The blade's not coming through the bottom of the plane. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to sand the bottom on here. Now, here's the deal. If I sand this without water on it, it's going to create a ton of dust, which is going to make a big mess. And it's also really bad for us to breathe. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a little bit of water. You can use water with the sandpaper because it's wet, dry sandpaper. So there's a bunch of different ways you can apply water. Something I like to do is just get a rag. You can even use a paper towel. I'm going to come over here to the sink. And it's going to go like this, and I'm just going to put a little bit of water there on our wet, dry sandpaper, and that water is going to lubricate it. Then I'm going to take the plane, and I'm going to move the plane back and forth, just like this. Remember, make sure you ask your parents before you start doing this in the kitchen. This can make a mess. I'm not concerned about it because these counters are granite, so I know it's not going to stain these counters. But I'm working on a totally flat surface. You want to find the flattest surface you can work on. Now I'm going to take it and I'm going to look at the bottom of my plane. If you look carefully, you can see how it's actually starting to change color right in here where it's been sanded. Those places are the high spots on the bottom of the plane, and what we're trying to do is sand it until it's all totally flat and even. Good, yeah. He's got two hands on it, he's pushing down really hard and he's moving it back and forth. You want to make sure you're pushing it down as flat as you can. Good. We're going to keep going. If it seems like it's taking a really long time, like looking at this now, I'm going to flip it over. Let's flip it over and look at it. Looking at it now, it's kind of taking a while. So instead of using the 220, I might actually start out with the 120. It'll go a little bit faster. Wet dry sandpaper because it was taking too long with the 220. So I'm going to move it back and forth. You'll notice I don't have it taped down to the countertop anymore. You can tape it if you want. It'll help keep it in place. I'm using my fingers here just to hold it, and I'm moving back and forth. You want to check, look at your countertop, look at that slurry there that I've developed. Those are actually really fine metal shavings. I'm just going to take it and wipe it off. Remember, if you have a countertop that's porous and it will soak this stuff up, you don't want to do it on it. So I would check before you do it. And I'm just going to keep moving back and forth now with the 120 grit paper. It's going to take a while to do. You'll probably break a sweat. See here, I'm getting a little bit closer. Okay, I've spent a little while on this, and it's still not perfect, but it's looking pretty close. I've got the bottom of the plane more or less flat. Remember, what we're trying to do here is flatten out the bottom of the plane. So you can't just take the sandpaper and rub it on the plane like this. If you do that, it's eventually going to contour the plane to your hand. So you want to be doing this on a totally flat surface, which is why we're doing it on the countertops. Take a look at my hands. You'll notice they're really dirty now. I've got a bunch of shavings on them. So I'm going to be sure to wash them off before I go and touch the cabinets in the house or furniture or anything like that. We've got the bottom done. So now that the bottom's done, what we're gonna do is work on the blade, and I'm gonna zoom in. I'm gonna take the plane apart. Remember, I'm not gonna spend a bunch of time talking about how to put the plane together and take it apart. I want you to fiddle with it yourself, spend 15 minutes just putting it together, taking it apart. I was joking around and I threw the instructions out, but it's not a bad idea to check out the instructions and read about how it's supposed to go together. You can also probably find another YouTube video about this, but I'm gonna take it apart. I'm gonna set the body aside. I'm gonna set the lever cap aside. And now I just have the blade. So what we're gonna do now is try to sharpen the blade. To do that, you need to understand one important thing. The sharp edge is just a place where two perfectly polished surfaces come together at a point. So what we're gonna do is polish this back edge the best we can, and then we're gonna, or the back I should say, and then we're gonna polish the top bevel the best we can. We're gonna use our wet dry sandpaper for this. So I'm not gonna use the 120 or the 220. I'm actually gonna start out with something in the 300 range, and there should be some 320 in that pack that you have. So I'm gonna take the 320 and I'm gonna get it a little bit wet. It actually helps if your countertop's a little bit wet too. But I'm gonna get it a little bit wet. I'll add a little bit more water to it here. And the first thing I'm gonna do is try to polish the back of the blade. Now, if you can attach the wet dry sandpaper to your countertop, it's gonna be way easier to do this. If you can't, you're just gonna have to use one hand. I'm not gonna tape it because I have a feeling it's a little bit too wet. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hold it right here. It's not a bad idea. Get someone to help you. Get your mom or dad to help you hold the sandpaper in place. And then what you're gonna do is take the blade and you're gonna put a lot of pressure down on this part of the blade. You're gonna come to the edge of your countertop. You're gonna have about that much of the blade on the sandpaper, and you're gonna move the blade back and forth. You're just sanding that edge of the blade. So I'm gonna come along here on the 320, and I'm just gonna push down really hard. You're gonna use two hands. You're gonna go like this, and just keep going back and forth. You wanna keep doing this until the color of the steel changes. It should look more polished where you did it. It should look a little bit different than the rest of the blade. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but you want it to be uniform and polished. If you see a place like a dull spot where it's not polished, that shows that you have a little indentation in the blade. And we don't want that. We want the back to be even and totally polished. So I'm going to move along here, and I'm going to keep going back and forth until I get it polished. And this is with the 300 grit paper. So now I'm gonna look at it. I don't know if you guys can see this, but there's a slight difference in kind of the color here where I've been polishing and here where I haven't been polishing. So that was with 300. After I do 300, I'm then gonna move on to 400. I'm gonna wet the paper. I'm gonna come right here, and I'm just gonna move it back and forth, pushing down hard. You're gonna use two hands. You're gonna get someone to help you hold it.
I'm gonna move it back and forth. Notice how I'm using the edge of the countertop? I'm not trying to hold it right here. It's hard to do right here. I'm letting it hang over the edge.
So this is what it should look like after it's been polished with the 400 grit sandpaper. And then the last thing we're going to do is polish it with the 600 grit.
Hold it, bring it to the edge of the counter. Make sure you're not dripping black stuff all over your cabinets underneath there, or wherever you're working.
It's nice if you have a space outside where you can do this, but I know not everybody does. You know, a glass table outside actually probably wouldn't be a bad place to do it. Glass can be a really flat surface, so if you have like a patio table that looks flat, that might not be a bad place to do it. I hadn't thought about that before. And just kind of make do with what you have and do the best you can. I now have the back of my blade flattened and shiny. I polished it to 600 grit. People that are really serious about this are going to polish it with much finer sandpaper than 600. They're going to go, you know, up to 3,000, and then they're going to strop it and really try to polish it. We're not worrying about that for what we're doing here. We're just going to take it to 600. 600 is about as fine as it's going to get. if you want to keep going, you can keep going with your wet dry sandpaper, and you can take it all the way up to 3,000 if you really want to. You just need to keep stepping up the grit as you go, but really you can probably stop at 6. So I've got the back flat. Now what we want to do is try to polish the bevel edge. And this is a little bit trickier. So you're going to need to get out your honing guide, which I'm guessing you ordered from Amazon. And yours probably looks something like this. To set up your blade in your honing guide, you're going to need a flathead screwdriver. Or you could actually, let's see, you know what? You could use your lever cap for this. This would work too. There's probably going to be a slotted screwdriver head right here. So yeah, just use your lever cap on your plane. You don't even need a screwdriver for this. You're going to take your blade, and what I want you to do is put your blade flat inside here with the bevel facing down. So this is the bevel right here. You want your bevel to be facing down, and you want the side that you just polished to be facing up. And you're going to stick it just kind of in the middle for now, and then take your screwdriver or use your lever cap here. You know what? I'm going to use my screwdriver. But I'm going to start out tightening it with my fingers, and then I can come back and tighten it with my screwdriver. Now this is really, really important, and I think I'm going to have to change the angle of the camera to show you what I want you to do. But I want you to take the blade once it's in the honing guide, and I want you to set it down on the counter like that. So it should be now facing down, and the bevel should be touching the countertop. Okay, so I've got my blade in my honing guide, and I have it set up so that the bevel is now against my flat surface, which is my kitchen countertop here. Here's what I want you to do. You're going to take the blade, and you're going to set it up. You're going to adjust the blade in the guide so that if you look really, really carefully at the bevel, you guys are going to have to bear with me here. This is a little tricky to do. I'm holding the camera as I do this. You want the blade of the bevel to just be touching on the last 1/8 or so of the bevel. So you'll notice it's just touching right there. Let me show you the difference. I'm going to make a few adjustments and we'll see if we can get it. So right now, if you look at the way how it's set up right now, you'll notice the very tip of the bevel is touching. We don't want that. If you look at how it's set up right now, the whole bevel's touching. We don't want that. We just want the last maybe 1/8 or even 1/16 of an inch touching. So once I get that set, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to tighten it up. I'm going to recheck. Push down. It looks like it's just touching that last 1/8 of an inch. Now that I have it set up so the last 1/8 of an inch of the bevel is touching the countertop, I'm going to tighten up the honing guide, and I want to make sure it's really tight in there. I don't want it adjusting or coming out as I'm honing the blade. Honing is another name for sharpening, by the way. Some people call it honing, some people call it sharpening. Honing, I guess technically is a finer type of sharpening, but we'll use the term interchangeably. Okay, so I've got my blade set up in my honing guide now. The bevel's facing down, and I know that just the last part of the blade is going to be touching the surface that I put it up against. Before I start honing, I want to show you something. When I hold the honing guide, it's really important you hold it with 2 hands. I'm going to put my thumbs underneath the blade. I'm going to put my fingers on top. You might want to stop the video for a second and just practice doing that. But this roller right here is going to roll on the flat surface. I'm going to be pushing down really hard with these 2 fingers. I'm going to hold it flat, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it back and forth over the wet dry sandpaper. And I think for this we could probably start with 400. So let's start with 400 and see what happens. So to it. Now I'm going to set up the honing guide. I'm going to put 2 hands on it. And I'm just going to move it back and forth like this. Right now I'm using the 400 grip. After I take a couple passes, I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to look at it. Now, if you look at the blade here, you'll notice just the last little bit of the blade is being honed. That's what we want. You don't need to do the whole bevel, you just need to do the last little part of the bevel. And there are more technical ways to do this, but we're not going to worry about that. I'm pushing down equally on both sides, and I'm moving it back and forth. This really shouldn't take too long to do this. And I'm a little uneven here, but I'm actually not going to worry about it too much because the whole edge now has been honed. Something you're going to notice when you do this, when you run your finger along the back of the blade, it's going to feel like the blade's curled over. Well, it is. That's called a burr. And we're going to take that burr off at the very end. But there's our 400. So we finished the 400. Now we're going to do our 600. So I'm going to wet it. Put it back in. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the 600. You want to be careful not to cut the sandpaper. Make sure it stays really flat. Moving back and forth. And you can see how my edge has that nice polished look right along there. And I can tell you now it's quite a bit sharper than it was when we first began. It looks pretty even. So now I'm going to take it out of the guide. Like this. The last thing we want to do is get rid of the burr that's on the back. So you'll feel a little kind of hook along the back of the blade there. We want to get rid of that. To get rid of that, we're going to do the same thing we did at the very beginning, but we're only going to do it about 3 times. We're going to take it, I'm going to put my fingers on top, we're going to move it back and forth. 1, 2, 3. And that's probably all it's going to take. Now, right now your blade should be pretty sharp. You need to be really careful with this. One of the best ways to check to see if a blade's sharp is to actually take it. You can take it and very carefully put it down on your fingernail and try to move it back and forth. And if it sticks, that means it's sharp. So this blade is plenty sharp for what we're going to be doing in our class. So now that your blade's sharp, what you can do, just take a paper towel, get all that extra water off. Water and moisture is our enemy. It's going to create rust. So once you have it all dried off, the best thing to do is take a little bit of oil, just any kind of oil will work, and put a really thin layer of oil on the blade. You don't want so much on it that it gets oil on the wood when we're working, but you do want to put a thin layer of oil here, and you want to do the same thing on the parts of your plane here. So we'll carefully put it back together. Fiona and Wes, you guys want to try this out?
Yeah. Okay.
We'll go back in the garage and we'll let Wesley try this out.